Every evening, when the sky turned orange and the city lights flickered on, Marcus pushed his cleaning cart into the tall glass building downtown. He was a black janitor, quiet and polite, the kind of man who kept his head down and did his job with care. Most people in the building didn't even know his name. They just saw the uniform, the mop, and the gentle smile. But Marcus had someone waiting for him every day, his 14-year-old son Elijah. Elijah didn't complain when he had to wait for hours. He knew his father didn't have money for a babysitter, and besides, he liked being close to him. He sat in the storage room with a small backpack, doing his homework, reading old books. He never made noise, never touched anything, and no one really noticed him, except one day, something changed. Elijah had finished his homework early and got bored sitting alone. So he quietly stepped out and walked down the shiny hallway, his sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. He looked around, wide-eyed at the bright paintings and expensive furniture. That's when he heard loud laughter and music coming from one of the lounges. Inside the executive lounge, rich men and women in suits were drinking, laughing and showing off. Among them was Richard Grayson, the top millionaire boss of the company. He was tall, wore a sharp suit, and always had a smug smile on his face. He liked attention and didn't care who he stepped on to get it. Richard saw Elijah standing near the door and raised an eyebrow. "Hey, who let the janitor's kid in?" he said loudly, making everyone look. Some chuckled, others looked away, not wanting to get involved. Elijah didn't say anything, just stood there frozen, feeling their eyes on him like heat. Richard walked over with a drink in his hand and looked down at the boy. "What's your name, kid?" "Elijah," he said quietly. "Well, Elijah," Richard smirked. "Do you know what Latin is?" Elijah nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. The room got quieter, some curious, some uncomfortable. Richard pulled out an old leather-bound book from a shelf nearby and waved it. "This is Latin," he said, shaking the book like a toy. "Translate it, and my salary is yours." He laughed, thinking he was being clever. The room laughed too, but not Elijah. He took the book gently, looking at the faded golden letters on the cover. He didn't laugh, he didn't speak. He just nodded and walked out with the book in his hands. Richard turned back to his friends with a wide grin. "See, that's how you keep people in their place," he whispered to a man beside him. But something in the room had shifted. A few people didn't laugh. A few looked uneasy. Elijah walked back to the storage room, his heart pounding. He didn't feel angry. He didn't even feel sad. He felt challenged. This wasn't just about a book. It was about showing them that being a janitor's son didn't mean he was small. Back in the storage room, under the dim light, Elijah opened the book. The pages were yellow, the ink faded but readable, and to most people it would look like gibberish. But to Elijah, it looked like a puzzle his mother had taught him to solve. His mother had died 2 years ago, but before she passed, she was a university language professor. She had homeschooled Elijah for years, making games out of Latin, Greek, and ancient languages. He remembered her warm voice saying, "One day people will underestimate you, and that's when you'll surprise them." Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't cry. He sharpened a pencil, pulled out some blank sheets and started working, word by word, sentence by sentence. Elijah translated the old text. It was a speech about power and pride, spoken by a Roman leader thousands of years ago. It talked about how true strength came from humility, not money, not fame. And the more Elijah read, the more powerful he felt. Outside, his father mopped floors in silence. He didn't know his son was doing something amazing just down the hall. To him, Elijah was just reading, like always. But that night, something was being born in that small storage room, something no one saw coming. The next day, Elijah returned to the building early. He had the book in one hand and his own papers in the other. His heart was racing, but he walked with steady feet. He wasn't afraid of Richard or his suit. He wasn't afraid of laughter or mockery. He just wanted to look that man in the eyes and say, "Here, I did it." Because this time, he wasn't just the janitor's son, he was something much more, and he was about to show the entire building what he could do. Elijah didn't sleep much that night. He sat on the cold floor of the storage room, with the Latin book open in front of him. Around him were boxes of cleaning supplies, an old chair, and a single light bulb that buzzed quietly above. But in his hands, he held something powerful, words from the past that could prove who he truly was. His father, Marcus, had finished cleaning around midnight and peeked in. "You all right, son?" he asked softly, wiping sweat from his forehead. Elijah quickly placed his papers under his backpack and smiled. "Yeah, just finishing some reading," he said, not ready to explain just yet. Marcus nodded and gave him a tired smile. "All right, we're leaving soon. You hungry?" Elijah shook his head. "I'm okay." But he wasn't okay. Not because he was hurt, but because something inside him had awakened. The challenge that millionaire Richard had thrown at him wasn't a joke to Elijah. It was a chance to show the world that knowledge didn't belong only to the rich, that intelligence wasn't decided by the color of your skin or the job your father did. All night Elijah worked with sharp focus. He used the lessons his mother taught him before she passed away. He remembered the games she played with him, the way she'd smile when he got the words right. "Translate this," she used to say, "and you'll unlock a secret." She made language feel like magic, like it opened doors no one else could see. Now he was holding a real key, a Latin speech written by a Roman philosopher long ago. Elijah read the lines carefully, stopping often to think. Each phrase taught a lesson about pride, power, and how those with true strength often don't show it. The speech talked about the danger of mocking others and how time always reveals the truth. Elijah couldn't believe it. This book, given to him as a joke, was actually about people like Richard, men who used their position to look down on others, and the more he read, the stronger he felt. By the time the sun began to rise, Elijah had finished. He had translated the entire passage on 6 sheets of paper, all written neatly in pencil. He folded the papers and placed them in his backpack. Then he sat quietly, watching the early light pour into the hallway outside. His father was still sleeping on a bench, using his jacket as a pillow. Elijah looked at him and felt something deep in his chest. Not shame, never shame, but a fire, a wish to one day make sure his father never had to scrub floors again. Not because cleaning was bad, but because his father had done enough sacrifices, enough hard days, enough silent pain. Later that morning, while Marcus continued his duties on the lower floors, Elijah walked quietly up to the executive level. He waited near the front desk, his hands clutching his backpack straps. When the tall glass elevator opened, Richard Grayson stepped out, laughing with 2 other men. He stopped mid-step when he saw Elijah, eyebrows raised. "You again?" Richard said, "Back for more." Elijah took a breath and pulled out the folded translation. He held it out calmly. "You said if I translated it, I'd earn your salary." The other 2 men smirked, expecting a mess of nonsense. Richard took the papers with one hand, lazily flipping through them, but then his smile dropped. He read the first paragraph again, then the second. His eyes narrowed as he realized the Latin had been fully translated, and it made perfect sense. Even the tone matched the ancient philosopher's original words. The spelling was clean, the grammar flawless. This is correct," he muttered, stunned. One of the men behind him whispered, "Wait, he really did it." Richard didn't answer. He looked at Elijah with a strange mix of disbelief and something else, something close to fear. He tried to cover it up with a laugh. "Okay, kid, where'd you copy this from? Some website?" Elijah didn't move. "I did it myself," he said quietly. "My mum taught me Latin." The mention of his mother made a few people pause. Richard looked around, noticing the curious stares from a few employees nearby. He realized this moment was slipping out of his control. He wanted to dismiss it, to make it a joke again, but he couldn't. The translation was real, and everyone could see it. "You know I was kidding about the salary," Richard said, trying to laugh again. "I know," Elijah replied, "but I wasn't joking when I said I could do it." Silence, a heavy silence that even Richard couldn't break. Then Elijah turned and walked away, not with pride in his step, but peace. He didn't need a reward. He just wanted to be seen for once, truly seen. Downstairs, Marcus was still wiping windows. Elijah didn't tell him right away. He just stood beside him, picked up a cloth and helped. Because even though he had just amazed the highest man in the building, he knew who the real hero was, the man beside him, his father. Whispers moved through the halls like wind. People who never even glanced at the janitor's son were now talking about him in hushed voices. Elijah, that's his name, right? Did you hear? The boy translated ancient Latin perfectly. Richard looked like he saw a ghost, but Elijah didn't care about whispers. He hadn't done it to impress anyone. He had done it to prove that being poor didn't mean being less. Still, he couldn't help but feel something was changing. When he returned that morning with his father, Elijah noticed people looking at him differently, some with curiosity, some with respect, some with disbelief, but none of that mattered. He was just happy to be walking beside his father, holding the same old backpack. Marcus didn't know everything yet. He just knew something had happened the day before, something big. "Elijah," he said while pushing the cleaning cart, "what did you do yesterday?" "I just gave Mr. Richard the translation," Elijah replied quietly. "Translation?" Marcus paused. "You mean that old book?" Elijah nodded. "Yeah, I translated it like he asked. He didn't expect me to, though." Marcus stopped walking. He turned to look at his son. "You mean you really translated the whole thing?" "Yes, Dad." Elijah smiled. "Mom taught me enough. I remembered everything." Marcus stared at him, speechless. Then slowly, a smile stretched across his face, the kind of smile that held back tears. "You're incredible," he whispered, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. But before either of them could say more, a voice interrupted. "Well, look who's back." Richard Grayson stood behind them, with his hands in his pockets, and a fake smile on his face. He was alone this time. No laughter, no crowd. His eyes darted between father and son. "Elijah, I've been thinking," Richard said, keeping his voice calm. "You really surprised me. That translation, it was something else." "Thank you," Elijah replied politely. Richard nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Listen, I want you to come up with me to my office. There's something I want to show you." Marcus didn't like it. He stepped forward slightly, standing between Richard and his son. "Why?" he asked, not rudely, but firmly. Richard raised an eyebrow. "No harm, of course. Just want to have a chat. A few people want to meet the genius kid. That's all." Elijah looked at his father, then gave a small nod. "It's okay, Dad. I'll be fine." Marcus hesitated, but slowly stepped aside. He trusted his son, but not the millionaire. Still, he didn't stop him. Inside the elevator, Elijah stood quietly as the numbers rose. Richard said nothing until they reached the top floor. When the doors opened, the silence turned into quiet stares from employees at their desks. They had all heard the story by now. Some smiled at Elijah, others just stared, surprised by how young and calm he looked. Richard led him into a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows and bookshelves filled with rare volumes. He gestured to a leather chair. "Sit," he said, and Elijah did. Richard took a seat behind his desk, opened a drawer and pulled out the Latin book from before. Beside it, he placed Elijah's translation. "I checked it," he said, flipping through the pages. "I even asked 2 university experts to look at it. They said it was flawless." Elijah stayed silent, waiting. Richard leaned forward, folding his hands. "Tell me something, Elijah," he said, voice lower now. "Why didn't you ask for anything? You could have embarrassed me. You could have demanded something, and people would have supported you." Elijah thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I didn't want anything. You gave me a challenge. I answered it. That's all." Richard stared at him, then gave a short laugh. "You're either very smart or very dangerous." "I'm not dangerous," Elijah said, confused. "Oh, but you are." Richard smiled darkly. "Someone like you, young, poor, sharp. People love stories like that, and they love tearing down men like me." He stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the city. "Do you know what it took for me to get here, Elijah? To sit in this chair?" "No," Elijah replied honestly. "Everything." Richard said, "I clawed my way up. I didn't have anyone help me. I earned it all." He turned around sharply. "And here you are, a janitor's son, embarrassing me in my own office." Elijah stood up slowly. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," he said. "I just wanted to be taken seriously." Richard studied him, eyes cold now. "Well, you are," he muttered. He opened another drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "I'll make you an offer," he said, scribbling quickly. 5,000. Take it, and we'll call it even. No more talks, no more noise. You disappear, and this whole thing fades away." Elijah looked at the check, then looked back at the man offering it. He didn't touch the paper. "I'm not for sale," he said simply. Then he turned around and walked out. Outside, people watched as he stepped out of the office. Some were smiling, some looked shocked, but Elijah didn't care about their faces. He only cared about one, his father's, waiting by the elevator. Marcus looked at his son and asked softly, "How'd it go?" Elijah smiled. "I didn't take the money," he said. Marcus nodded with pride. "Good," he whispered. "You're already richer than he'll ever be." After Elijah turned down the money and left Richard's office, whispers in the building only grew louder. The janitor's son had not only translated ancient Latin, but also walked away from a bribe. People couldn't stop talking about it. Some called him brave, others called him foolish, but to Elijah, it didn't matter. He had done what he believed was right, and that gave him peace. Down in the hallway, Marcus looked at his son with quiet pride. He didn't speak for a while, just walked beside him as they returned to the lower floors. But inside, Marcus was thinking deeply. He had cleaned that building for 10 years, never causing trouble, never asking for anything. And now, because of his son, people were finally seeing him. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A woman in a grey suit stopped Marcus while he was mopping the lobby. "Are you Elijah's father?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus said carefully. She smiled kindly. "I saw what your son did. That boy has a gift." Marcus thanked her, unsure of what else to say. Then 2 more people came, a man from Human Resources and a young intern from the legal department. All of them asked the same questions. "How old is your son? Where did he learn Latin? Would he be interested in meeting someone from our education partners?" Marcus didn't have answers to all of them, but he said what he knew. "He loves to learn, ma'am. That's all I can tell you." One of them took Marcus's number, saying they'd be in touch. By the end of the day, Marcus had spoken more to company staff than he had in his entire life there. Meanwhile, Richard Grayson sat in his office, staring out the window. He wasn't used to losing, and Elijah had made him feel something worse than defeat: humiliation. He had tried to crush a cleaner's boy in front of his peers, and instead, the boy had risen higher than anyone expected. Now employees whispered about Elijah with admiration, and they looked at Richard with quiet judgment. The next day, a junior employee posted the story anonymously on a message board. It was simple. Millionaire mocked janitor's son with a Latin challenge. Boy completed it perfectly, refused money, walked away with dignity. The post spread like wildfire. People shared it across social media, tagging news channels, schools, and community pages. The internet loved the story. Truth, pride, intelligence, and justice, all in one moment. Within 48 hours, Elijah's name was trending online. Journalists reached out, teachers commented, even famous speakers praised his actions. Some people wanted to interview him, others wanted to give him scholarships. But Elijah stayed quiet. He didn't chase the attention. He still wore the same shoes, carried the same backpack, and waited for his father every evening like always. Marcus began getting phone calls. One came from a private school director. "We'd like to offer your son a scholarship," the man said. Another call came from a university language professor. "I'd love to mentor him," she said. "He has real talent." Marcus was stunned. He had spent years thinking the world wouldn't notice people like them. But now the world was knocking on their door. He told Elijah about the offers that night. Elijah listened carefully and asked, "What do you think, Dad?" Marcus smiled. "I think your mother would have been proud." Elijah's eyes softened. He still remembered her voice, her gentle way of teaching him Latin like it was a bedtime story. He missed her every day, and now somehow her lessons were lighting the path ahead. At the same time, back at the office, Richard Grayson was facing problems of his own. Some employees filed quiet complaints about his behavior toward Elijah. Others started questioning his leadership. Should someone like him still be in charge? One woman whispered to another. For the first time in years, Richard's power was slipping. He had built his empire on arrogance and charm, but now both were cracking. One morning, Richard arrived at the office and found a letter on his desk. It was from the board of directors. They were launching a formal review of his conduct. Apparently, humiliating a teenager and offering hush money didn't look good in public, and the board was feeling the pressure from the internet storm. Richard clenched the letter in his fist. All of this because of a janitor's son. Meanwhile, Elijah was asked to appear at a community event. They wanted him to speak for a few minutes and read a small part of the translated Latin speech. At first he said no, he didn't like crowds, but Marcus gently encouraged him. Sometimes, son, your voice is the thing that changes someone else's life. So Elijah agreed. On the night of the event, he stood on a simple stage in a school auditorium. People clapped as he stepped forward, holding the same piece of paper he had given Richard. He looked out at the audience, students, parents, teachers, even strangers. He cleared his throat and read, "Power without humility is like a sword with no handle, sharp but impossible to hold." The room went silent. His voice was calm, clear, and confident. When he finished, people rose from their seats and applauded. Elijah didn't smile to show off. He just nodded quietly and returned to his seat. From the back of the room, Marcus wiped a tear from his cheek. He wasn't crying out of sadness. He was watching something happen right before his eyes. His son was becoming something more. Not rich, not famous, something even better. A symbol of quiet strength, and of what could happen when someone believed in themselves. After the event, things began to move fast for Elijah. People from across the city reached out to him and his father. A local radio host wanted to interview him. A city mayor sent a message saying he was proud of him. Even a big educational charity offered to sponsor Elijah's studies until university. But Elijah remained calm. He still helped his father carry the cleaning cart in the evenings, still wore the same jacket with the torn pocket, still waited patiently in the storage room with a book in his hands. He didn't care about fame, he just wanted to learn, quietly. Marcus couldn't believe how much had changed in a week. All his life he had felt invisible, but now people in the building stopped him, shook his hand and said, "Your son is amazing. Your boy made us all proud." Even some of the same people who used to walk past him like he wasn't there were now smiling and nodding as he worked. It felt strange, but good. One day, as Elijah was finishing some homework at a table near the break room, a woman approached him with a badge on her chest, New York Academy for Scholars. She smiled kindly. "Hi, Elijah. I'm Dr. Rachel Green. May I sit?" Elijah nodded, and she sat across from him. "I'm here because I read your translation," she said. "I run one of the top schools for gifted students, and I'd like to invite you to visit it." Elijah listened carefully. "We offer small classrooms, advanced language courses, and full scholarships," she continued. "You won't need to pay a cent. Not for food, not for books, not for anything." He looked surprised. "You really mean free, even for someone like me?" Dr. Green smiled. "Especially for someone like you." That evening, he told Marcus everything. His father sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his tired hands together. "It sounds amazing," Marcus said softly. "But are you sure you want to leave the school you're in now? Your friends?" Elijah nodded slowly. "I think Mum would have wanted me to go. She always said, if someone offers you a bigger door, open it." Marcus chuckled through misty eyes. "She did say that." And just like that, Elijah made the biggest decision of his life. 3 weeks later, Elijah walked into the New York Academy for Scholars for the first time. It was beautiful. Tall ceilings, glass walls, huge libraries, and students from every background. No one looked down on anyone. There were kids from rich families, yes, but also kids from foster homes, war-torn countries and shelters. Here, everyone was treated equally, based on their mind, not their money. On the first day, a teacher handed Elijah an old book and asked, "Can you read this?" Elijah opened it, smiled and said, "It's ancient Greek." The whole class turned to stare. Within minutes, they realized Elijah wasn't just smart. He was brilliant. He quickly became known in the school for his calm nature, sharp brain and kindness. He helped others without being asked. He never bragged, never demanded praise. Some called him the silent scholar because he was so quiet yet so powerful with words. Meanwhile, back at the office building, things weren't going well for Richard Grayson. The board of directors had launched a formal investigation into his behavior. They found more than just the incident with Elijah. Several past employees came forward, saying Richard had mistreated them too. Some said he mocked them, pressured them, even threatened to ruin careers. The company couldn't ignore it anymore. One morning, Richard was asked to step down from his position. He left the building quietly, without a press statement. No applause, no farewell. Just a man in a suit, carrying a box of his things. As he passed Marcus in the lobby, he stopped for a second. "I guess your boy won," he muttered. Marcus looked at him, not with hate, but calm strength. "No," he replied, "my boy didn't try to win anything. He just stood his ground." Richard said nothing else and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. At school, Elijah continued to shine. He was selected for a national language competition and won first place. He began writing short essays in ancient languages and translating them into modern poems. Some of his work was even published in academic journals. People were amazed at his gift, but also touched by his story. He never stopped mentioning his parents in every speech. "My mother taught me to read with love," he once said at an award ceremony, "and my father taught me what real strength looks like, quiet, humble, and always standing tall." That night, Marcus stood in the crowd, clapping with the others, but his heart clapped the loudest. For years he had cleaned windows so others could see clearly. Now his son had opened a window for the world to see them both, clearly, proudly, and forever. It had been 6 months since Elijah first walked into the New York Academy for Scholars. He had become one of the top students, not just in language, but in every subject he touched. His teachers were amazed at how fast he learned, and his classmates respected him, not because he was popular, but because he was kind. He never made others feel small, even though he was the smartest in the room. He helped students who struggled, stayed after class when someone needed help. He listened more than he spoke, but when he spoke, people listened. Back at the apartment, Marcus still worked nights cleaning offices, but now people at work treated him with respect. They didn't just see a cleaner anymore, they saw the father of Elijah. Sometimes new employees would say, "Wait, are you Elijah's dad?" And Marcus would smile proudly, "Yes, I am." One cold afternoon, as Elijah was leaving the academy, a black car stopped beside him. The window rolled down, and a man in a sharp blue suit stepped out. "Are you Elijah Thomas?" the man asked. "Yes," Elijah replied, unsure who he was. The man handed him a card. "I work with the International Youth Scholars Program. We've been watching your progress. You've impressed a lot of people." Elijah blinked, surprised. "We'd like to invite you to speak at our global summit in Geneva," the man continued. "You'll be representing young scholars from the United States, all expenses paid." Elijah didn't know what to say. "Why me?" he finally asked. The man smiled. "Because you earned it, and because the world needs to hear your voice." That night, Elijah sat with his father at the kitchen table, holding the invitation. "Geneva," Marcus whispered, looking at the paper. "Switzerland. That's halfway across the world." Elijah nodded. "They want me to speak for 10 minutes, in front of world leaders, scientists and students from everywhere." Marcus looked at his son for a long time, then reached out and took his hand. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "Not because you're going far, but because you stayed true." A few weeks later, Elijah boarded a plane for the first time in his life. He looked out the window, watching the clouds float below. He didn't feel nervous, just quiet and thoughtful. He brought with him only a small bag, his mother's old language notes, and the same Latin translation that had changed everything. In Geneva, everything felt big and grand. The streets were clean, the buildings tall, and the people spoke many languages. Elijah listened to every sound, curious and calm. At the summit, he was given a small badge, Elijah Thomas, Speaker, United States. When his turn came, he walked slowly onto the stage. The audience was filled with people from all over the world, politicians, professors, young leaders, even journalists. He stood at the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Then he began, not with his own words, but with a translation. In ancient times, power was not in gold or thrones. It was in wisdom, in words, in kindness. He paused, then said, "My name is Elijah Thomas. I am the son of a janitor and a language teacher. I was born into a world that didn't expect much from me, but I learned that what people expect is not what defines you." He told them about the millionaire, about the challenge, about how he stayed up late in a cleaning closet to translate ancient Latin. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just spoke with a calm strength. "I didn't translate that book for money," he said. "I did it to show that greatness can come from anywhere, even from the quietest places." When he finished, the whole room stood up and clapped. Some people wiped their eyes, others stood with hands over their hearts. Elijah stepped back quietly, letting the noise rise around him, not for fame, but for the message. After the speech, many people came to meet him. A university president shook his hand and said, "You have a full scholarship waiting for you, any time." A translator from Italy said, "You reminded me why I fell in love with language." Even a well-known news anchor asked to feature him in a documentary. But Elijah didn't let it change him. He still ate simple meals, still called his dad every night. "Everything okay back home?" he'd ask, and Marcus would reply, "We're good. I mopped 4 floors today. No spills this time." They would both laugh, and it felt like home again, even from miles away. Back in the city, something else happened too. Richard Grayson, the millionaire who once mocked Elijah, saw the speech on the news. He sat alone in a quiet apartment, no longer rich, no longer powerful. He watched the boy he once laughed at, now standing before world leaders. For a long time he said nothing. Then he whispered to himself, "I was wrong." And in that moment Richard didn't feel angry. He felt small because he finally realized he had tried to crush a boy who only wanted to be heard. And that boy had changed the world with nothing but words and quiet strength. When Elijah returned from Geneva, the airport was full of people waiting, not just family, but strangers, reporters and students. A small crowd had gathered holding signs that said things like, "Welcome home, Elijah," and "Pride of the people." He was surprised, a little shy, but he smiled and waved. Marcus was there too, standing at the back of the crowd, hands in his pockets, trying not to cry. When Elijah saw his father, he didn't walk, he ran. He hugged him tight, holding on for a few seconds longer than usual. "I missed you, Dad," he whispered. "I missed you too, son," Marcus said, barely holding back the tears. Reporters tried to ask questions, cameras clicked, but Elijah didn't stop to speak. He just took his father's hand and walked away with him, because to him that was the real moment that mattered. Back at their apartment, not much had changed. Same small kitchen, same narrow hallway, same flickering bathroom light. But it felt warmer, filled with peace. They had very little, but they had everything. In the following weeks, Elijah started receiving letters from across the world. Kids from poor villages in Africa wrote, "You gave me hope." A girl from India wrote, "Now I want to learn Latin too." Even a boy from a rich school in London wrote, "You taught me that intelligence isn't owned by money." The letters were placed in a box Elijah kept under his bed. He didn't show them to many people, but every time he felt tired or unsure, he opened that box and read one. Each one reminded him that he wasn't just learning for himself anymore, he was learning for others too. One day, Elijah was invited to speak at a school near his old neighborhood. He stood in front of a group of kids. Many of them wore torn shoes and came from homes like his. He looked at them and said, "I wasn't born with power or money. I was born with curiosity. I asked questions, I read books, and I believed I could do something great." He paused and added, "And you can too. Even if no one believes in you, believe in yourself first." The room was silent, but their eyes were wide. Some of them had never heard someone say those words before. After the talk, one young boy ran up to him and asked, "Mr. Elijah, can I be like you too?" Elijah knelt down and smiled. "You already are," he said. "You just have to keep going." Meanwhile, something else was happening quietly behind the scenes. The school Elijah had attended before the scholarship, the public school near the city blocks, wanted to rename their library. They voted on a new name, and the answer was clear: the Elijah Thomas Library of Language and Learning. The principal visited Marcus personally and said, "Your son reminded our students what was possible." Marcus was speechless. He had spent so many years cleaning floors in silence, and now the same school was naming a library after his son. But Elijah didn't let any of the praise get to his head. He still washed his own dishes, helped his father on weekends, and shared his food with classmates who had none. He knew fame could disappear, but kindness stayed forever. One evening, while walking home from a bookstore, Elijah saw a familiar face sitting alone on a park bench. It was Richard Grayson, the former millionaire. His hair was grayer now, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired. For a moment, Elijah thought of walking past, but something made him stop. Richard looked up slowly, surprised. "Elijah," he said, "didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to see you either," Elijah replied calmly. There was a pause. Then Richard sighed. "I deserved what happened. You didn't ruin me. I ruined myself." Elijah sat down beside him. "You tried to make me feel small," he said, "not angry, just honest. But I learned something that day. When someone mocks you, they're really afraid of you." Richard nodded. "I was." He looked away. "I saw something in you that I didn't have anymore. Purpose." For a while they said nothing, just two people sitting quietly under the streetlight. Then Richard asked softly, "Do you hate me?" "No," Elijah said. "I just don't want to become you." Richard let out a sad laugh. "Smart answer." Then he stood and said, "Good luck, Elijah. Not that you need it." As he walked away, Elijah didn't feel victorious. He just felt free. He had no anger, no revenge in his heart, just peace. That night, Elijah returned home, placed a new book on his desk, and sat beside his father. "What are you working on now?" Marcus asked, sipping tea. "A letter," Elijah said, smiling. "To who?" "To kids who don't believe in themselves yet," Elijah answered. "Because someone needs to remind them they matter." Marcus nodded slowly, eyes warm with pride. And in that tiny apartment, under a flickering bulb, Elijah kept writing, not for fame, not for money, but because words had changed his life, and now he would use them to change the world. Years passed, but Elijah never changed who he was. He grew older, taller, wiser, but he was still the same quiet boy who loved books, still the same son who helped his father carry cleaning supplies when no one was watching, still the same young man who turned down a millionaire's check because respect meant more than money. At age 18, Elijah was accepted into the top university in the country, on a full scholarship. They didn't just want his grades, they wanted his voice, his heart, and the example he had become. He chose to study ancient languages, education and philosophy, but he also signed up for night classes in teaching, because he had a dream. He didn't just want to learn, he wanted to teach kids like him. Back at home, Marcus had finally retired from cleaning work. The building gave him a proper farewell with speeches and applause. Some even said, "We should have noticed you sooner." Marcus just smiled and replied, "You noticed my son. That's all I ever wanted." Elijah and Marcus moved into a small house, not fancy but warm and peaceful. They planted flowers out front, hung a photo of Elijah's mum in the living room, and built a little library in the corner with books in many languages. It wasn't big, but it was full of love. One day Elijah opened a small community school. It was free, built with help from donations and people who believed in his mission. He named it the Quiet Light Academy, because even a small light can guide someone through the dark, he said. The school welcomed children from all backgrounds, poor, rich, broken families, or no families at all. Every kid who walked through the door felt safe, not judged, not pushed aside, just seen, heard, and loved. Elijah taught in the mornings and cleaned the hallways in the evenings, just like his father once did. He said it reminded him to stay grounded. He told his students, "I'm not above the broom, I was raised by it." One afternoon, a young boy stood in front of him after class. The boy had tears in his eyes and said, "Mr. Elijah, no one ever believed in me, not even my mum." Elijah knelt and looked him in the eye. "I believe in you," he said gently. "I once sat where you're sitting, and someone believed in me too." He reached into his drawer and pulled out his old Latin translation, folded but still safe. "This helped me change my life. Now I want you to read it and see how strong words can be." The boy hugged him tightly, and Elijah knew this was his purpose, not applause, not awards, but moments like this. Over the years, Elijah received letters from former students who had grown up and done amazing things. One became a doctor, another became a writer, one girl even became a lawyer and started her own school. They all wrote the same thing: "You made me believe I could." Elijah kept every letter in a wooden box under his bed, just like he had done when he was young. He called it the Hope Box. Whenever he felt tired or unsure, he opened it and remembered who he was. One day a news channel visited the Quiet Light Academy. They wanted to make a short documentary about Elijah's life. They interviewed Marcus too, now older, with grey in his beard and kindness in his eyes. The reporter asked him, "Mr. Thomas, did you ever imagine your son would come this far?" Marcus chuckled softly and said, "No, but I always knew he would go somewhere, because his mother planted strong seeds in his heart." He looked at the camera and added, "And I just kept the light on while he grew." At the end of the documentary, the reporter asked Elijah, "If you could say one thing to the man who mocked you all those years ago, what would it be?" Elijah thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "Thank you." The reporter blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Elijah nodded. "Because of that moment, I discovered who I really was." He tried to shut a door, but instead, he lit a fire, and that fire became my path. The video went viral again, but Elijah didn't care about views or fame. He just cared that maybe one more kid out there sitting in a cold room with nothing but a pencil and a dream would feel hope again. And on quiet nights, when the city lights glowed far away and the house was silent, Elijah would sit by the window with a cup of tea, his father snoring in the next room, the stars twinkling above, and he'd smile to himself, because once upon a time a millionaire laughed at him, and now millions were listening, not to his voice but to what it stood for: dignity, knowledge, and the unshakable power of believing in yourself.